Hello and welcome back to the channel, and we're going to do a slightly different video today, which is the evolution of the 2K official courses. Now, the reason being, the recent Pinehurst that's come out is so good, and I played it in a society recently, and it's the first ever official course where it's a real one, where I've actually really wanted to go back and play it again. And so I thought it was worth doing a video, kind of, because I know that not everyone necessarily has the eye that designers have. And I thought it was good to point out not just kind of the mistakes of previous regimes, but also like the amount of work that's gone into getting this one right. So we're going to chart a few courses and have a look at a couple of them and then play around at Pinehurst. Now, this is the first hole at TPC Summerlin. It's not a course I'm familiar with. However, you can't see a thing. And there's some really cool items here that I wish we could get our hands on in the designer. These plants are really, really cool. And you look over it and like, oh yeah, there's a bunker there and a tiny tree beyond it. And the bunker itself, you can see the sculpting on the sides is really, really janky. It runs up to the top. Like, it's clearly where it would be in real life, and all the surfaces are kind of there. For those of you who aren't aware, you can bring LiDAR and real data into courses and into the designer through a couple of programs. But you have to do a ton of editing to get it right, because it doesn't do it perfectly, and it's often done using OpenStreetMap or mapping, and you have to still do a lot of tweaking. And with the early ones, it's fair to say this didn't really happen. There is some cool stuff. I would also really like this sort of ability with the textures. It is really nice. We've got some off-course stuff that looks... There's some interesting textures again here that I don't think we have. It would be really cool to have that brought in. So all of this stuff I'm confident does exist, but as you can see, hole one, okay, we're blind, we're hitting over trees, fine. Like that, we can forgive it. It happens every once in a while. So we can keep playing and have a look. Now the bunkers by the green, they are better. They're nothing really to write home about. They're just circles and shapes, and you can see how some of the surfacing gets a little bit janky here where it's getting too close to other lines. I also think part of the issues they're having is that all of these bunkers are done with splines, because that's what the LiDAR will bring in perfectly, whereas it can't bring in shapes. But the way the spline feature works is you can't get very tight shapes, which means you end up with generally blobs, unless you're really, really good at dealing with it, which, if you're making the sort of sightline errors you are off the first, it's unlikely. But even then, for those of us who are really, really good with that sort of stuff, it's difficult. Doing that stuff with splines is tough. So you're going to want to redo all of the bunkers, and you can see another one in the back where the lip isn't quite high enough. Anyway, we'll play a couple of holes. Second hole, same thing. Can't see a thing. Now this is the reason for this. In reality, this stuff probably isn't quite so high, but also think about where we're seeing this from. Normally in real life, we're seeing it from here. The way the game translates that, we're about 6 feet behind, 10 feet behind, and we're looking slightly down at the ball. We can't get the same perspective that a player would have. And having brought in LiDAR data on courses that I know aren't blind, tee shots, like, this happens. It's just the way the game translates it, and you have to be able to adapt it. Because actually, all of this looks pretty cool. I'd love to be able to see this off the tee. Instead, all I get is that. Anyhow, pop one down. You can see the edge of the off-course stuff, like you get the edge of a plot, and like the planting, it exists, it's fine, the items are there, but they're kind of just scattered around. It doesn't really feel like an environment that's totally immersive, but it exists. Again, I really like these textures though. But anyway, and the greens themselves, well, we've got some slopes that need to be sourced out. In reality, this probably works quite nicely and maybe even runs you into the bunker. However, what I suspect is more likely is the bunker is tighter up against the green. This is how the game's interpreting that data. I would be curious, anyone who's played TPC Summerlin second, if you hit to the right edge of the green, do you roll into the bunker? Because what this is going to do is roll us into the fringe. We're going to stick there and we're going to have a 5-yard chip, which is definitely not what happens in real life. Either you stick on the edge or you roll into the bunker, one or the other. The way we have it in game, I would love it if it did something like what EA's does, which, if you roll off the green, you do roll through the broth and into the bunker. That would be a massive playability upgrade. But as is, we don't really have that. But this sightline looks pretty nice. So credit where credit's due. We do have a slightly floating grandstand in the background, but big, yeah. But big picture, not an issue. Anyway, we'll play the third hole. Again, we're blind. You can sort of see a tiny bit here. At least you can see that bunker. Can't see the edge of the fairway. Certainly can't see the fairway you're supposed to optimistically be aiming for. The crowd's kind of, I don't know why they'd be there. They can't really see anything. These guys can't really see anything. It just, all of this stuff is probably sort of where it was in real life. It just hasn't necessarily been adapted. So anyway, that is TPC Summerlin. Next one we're going to look at, we're going to go and find Pebble, which was their more recent one that we were really excited to come out. Like, Pebble's an awesome course, and obviously that was the first kind of comparison we had with EA, and therefore that was always going to be interesting. So having a look at that, have I missed it? I've missed it. It's here. Having a look at that will be interesting. So this is now, I think, back in, I want to say January, but I'm probably way off with that. Anyway, it's within the last 6 months or so, so you'd hope a lot of those lessons have been learned. We get these awesome objects, like those new objects coming into the game and subsequently into the designer. Brilliant. Crowds, they're a bit better. They're very, very close. We've got the cool, like, tournament objects, which I like. You've got some new interesting housing, which we've never had, but you pan off and you've just got this. And like the sculpting here hasn't been looked at, the path, and I know nobody's going to do this, but you've got to plan as if they are. The crowds are standing within 1 inch of the light rough. Feels unlikely. They are underneath a tree. They are behind a tree. They're directly in the landing zone. They're between two bunkers. The crowd placement on this course makes absolutely zero sense. The bunker sculpting is okay. It's a bit better, but as you can see, they're kind of just still dropped at the base of a hill. There's no real definition to the lips. And then if we got to, well, we'll come to the green side ones in a second. But Pebble is an iconic course. You'd want that first tee shot to be totally arresting. Now, it gets a lot of the things right. I really like this little area. Like, the stuff around the tee looks better than Summerlin, so definite progress here. But it's still a little way off where we'd want it to be. So we're going to play 3 holes of this, and then we're going to go and play around at Pinehurst. Things that are unforgivable. Now, we run a reviewing site, so TGC Tours takes loads of designers' courses. This is something we typically see on courses we just don't approve to the database. No one ever takes a fairway, runs it straight into a green like this. It's going to match with the edges as much as possible. You're going to expand the surfaces. You also have done 2 completely different splines because the light rough has just kind of stopped and then it goes up to the green, and like no course does this either. Now granted, they're not always as perfectionist as maybe we are, and actually in real life there are some things that you can do that don't come off so well in the designer. But yeah, this isn't great. The same thing with the edge of the greens. Now, Pebble's green's famously tiny, and it's worth flagging, certainly before we get to Pinehurst, that the way we, designers or players of a game, perceive green slopes is different to real life. Like, you can't, when you're playing in real life, you don't think about a red slope or an orange slope or a green slope and whether a pin is fair or unfair, or like, the game just happens. Still, nevertheless, crowds again really, really close to this green, and they're just kind of in, like, they don't really feel evenly spaced, and the reason for that is how they've been placed. That's one brush, that's another brush, that's another brush, maybe 2, that's 1 or 2. When we're placing crowds in this game, you want to go tiny circle brush and just kind of drag it around and bring them in lines so they spread out. But again, it's little things that maybe we haven't totally understood. Oh, nearly continued our birdie streak. The greens on this one I did like, though. Like, they're definitely the Pebble greens. Sightline on this one better. Bunker positioning odd once more. Planting off the edge. Take it or leave it. Bunker sculpting here is really deep in spots, and like it just needs touching up really to make it work as neatly as we might want. But otherwise, this one generally pretty good. I think Pebble as a course has some flaws, but it's done a good job of actually doing what Pebble needs to be to make, well, doing what needs to be done to make Pebble Pebble. Like, it's recognisable, it plays pretty well. Birdie streak is definitely coming to an end. Oh, this bunker has some issues. It's very, very deep. Might be in real life, but again, could be neater. Anyway, so that's Pebble. I'm going to break just to the right. Okay, definite progress though. Like, not great, but pretty good. The sightline's generally better. Bunkering, I mean, you got an example here of, again, how the LiDAR data hasn't really imported because that little bit either doesn't exist or, again, I think it's a spline issue. With shapes, you can accomplish this. With splines, you can't. These bunkers just look very blobby if you compare it to the real ones. One thing we will do is very quickly fly over to 7, because obviously 6 and 7, real showstopper holes. 6, the cliffs look okay from this angle. 7, like this planting, again, we'd want to just invest a bit more time in it to, like, for one of the most recognisable holes in all of golf. I think the vista and the backdrop look great. This stuff is just a bit of an eyesore, and the bunkering, again, doesn't look quite like what we'd want. But definite upgrade, even if not quite all the way. So now let's look at Pinehurst. So might only play the 9 holes at Pinehurst. There's a couple of things I'd want to point out really on the back 9, but for the most part, going back to Pinehurst, now you can see from the picture, I mean, it looks great anyway, but go black tees, pin 1, sounds good. And I still think there's a few things they can do to make these even better, but it would be wrong not to notice the massive, massive improvements that have happened. So off the first tee, you can see all of the bunkers. The textures here look phenomenal. Obviously, they're bespoke, and we're hoping one day we get our hands on them. But it feels like Pinehurst off the bat. You can see all of the bunkers, which is not easy to do when they're lying as flat as they are. If you look at them, they've been sculpted really pretty well. They sit very nicely. They work into the fairway. I love that you can't really tell the difference between rough and fairway. It works very nicely. Now the bunkers have probably been, I don't think these are splines because you've got these edges. I'm going to guess that they've actually started brushing them, which is great, and maybe bits of splines, which, because that's integrating with fairway, so they know what they're doing with this one. And let's go and find one of those bunkers. Sees hazard, hits into hazard. The planting looks really good. It's a mix of grasses. Like, you looked at the depth of planting we had on the last couple of courses with just those single items. Remember on Pebble? Here, you've got different types of grasses that look really good. Like, yeah, it's probably not gone all the way you'd want it to, but I imagine there's other things that are taking up the meter. And if we pan off, like, we're not, okay, it's not the most detailed planted off here, but you're not seeing any glaring issues. Works pretty nicely. This bunker looks great, and actually this one feels like, because of the severity of it, you probably could roll off this green into this bunker, which works well. So if they've manipulated that to make that happen, then good on them. Okay, this is an interesting one. So there we go, which is awesome. Now you have to be a bit extreme with how that works, but I wouldn't be surprised if they've been changing how some of the sculpting works around the screen to get that to actually play correctly. Whereas in the past, it would have been left like that Summerlin hole. And now we're in, because it's Pinehurst, we're into a really sticky situation where you're just rolling off the green. Like, it plays like the course you would expect. I would still love to be able to putt this properly, or like have options that aren't just take a short chip and hole it, because that's too easy. I think, again, I've got very few things where I think EA has the edge over this game, but short game options is definitely one. Hole 2. I love that we got the bunker in front of us. You can see the crowds more in lines, and they do make sense. Like, they've looked at this and like, this is framed really well. Like, it feels like a tournament. Again, bunkers down both sides. Green's really good. The sculpting looks great. Sightlines, there's just so little you can actually pick up on. And as mentioned, for a flat course where you've got relatively little elevation, it's really hard to get these sightlines to work. You have to do quite a lot of sculpting around these bunkers, because if everything's flat, there's no dipping of the land in front of it to allow you to see over that. So they're definitely doing a lot more than they were with previous courses, and it's so much better for it. The other thing is these greens do feel like they feel real. And with Pinehurst, you couldn't half-ass the greens. You had to make sure that they actually played the way you wanted them to. I would still love it if the firmness got bumped up just a bit more, so that I have to really be thinking about landing that 9-iron, I don't know, here in order for it not to roll off the back. But it's about as good as we're going to get with the game we've got. Just panning around, you can see the detail. Like, it feels like a tournament that's in progress. I would also love to see other players on the course at the same time, but that's one future, I'd hope. Okay, next. So again, the crowds, maybe this person is struggling a little bit on their own. I might thin out a few of them, but that's possibly personal preference. If we look at the bunkers, like, look at the grasses we've got around them, the way they're kind of interwoven with one another. Like, the detail that has gone into this is just so far and beyond, above and beyond anything they've done before. And the result is something that looks really, really good. I haven't pointed out the fairway texture. That's different to anything we've seen. Again, would love to get this in the designer, but it looks great. Anything where it's just not neon green is brilliant. I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't feel like there are that many new items for creating this course. I think a lot of it's been done with stuff they already had, which in many ways is more impressive because they've always had this stuff. So suddenly now doing much, much better with it is brilliant. Oh, don't hit the flag. Thank you. And like, you get the dicey putts, and I do have some issues with a few of the pin positions on this course. I think some of them may be a touch difficult in game, or that they're on a double breaker or whatever. But I think that's a me thing in my perception of how a course should play in game. I'd also be interested to know whether the grandstand locations were taken from real life positions or not. This one feels maybe a touch close. Again, you've got the solitary bloke just on the right here. I don't know why he's there. Long par 4, again, like, just the areas around the greens look so good. It's really hard to understate how much better this is. And I mean, we talked about Summerlin earlier, or was it Summerlin or Pebble? No, Summerlin is one I would have not approved to our database because of the sightlines issues. Like, you can't, if you can't see what's going on from the tee, then you've made really big sculpting mistakes. So Summerlin not approved. We have 3 rankings. Pebble approved. Like, there's big issues with it. This is the most comfortable tour worthy of any official course we've seen. And has already been on a tour and hosted a really, really good event. Like, I would gladly play 4 rounds here, and it was that society round that prompted me to make this video. The greens are really, really good. Everything around them sculpted so well. Like the sight line off this tee is really good, and you can tell there's been time and care spent on the planting down here to make it work. And tree positions and like stuff and sizes and things. Like, stuff has been tweaked. It's not just been brought in and assumed that because it was there on the LiDAR, it's therefore going to be perfect. And you have to kind of critique those things. I mean, this is a really fun shot. And granted, this was a shame. This was there on the original LiDAR data, and that's not something that they've changed, but they've made this feel realistic by putting... I'd be interested to know how many hours went into this one compared to previous official courses, because the number of hours on this versus, say, Pebble versus, say, Summerlin, this has got to be right at the top end by a huge margin. I mean, again, grandstand position completely makes sense. One of the things I'm looking for is like, is there and if I were doing a critical playthrough for a contest course, say, is there anything grabbing my eye, or does this sideline just feel natural? And it feels totally natural, like everything belongs. Bunkers are great. They've definitely been redoing these. Like, these are done with shapes rather than splines, because you can't get those little twists and turns without that. Well, the back could be a... No, you still got the little... I'm going to guess it a little circle brush. That just looks so good. So yeah, I mean, I guess if you were summing this video up in a sentence, it would be, please keep what you're doing what you're doing with future courses. Like, any future officials you might have, whatever you've done with this one. Case in point for the chip shot again. And I'd hope that they see the difference as well. They're probably not going to watch the video, but I'd really hope that they see how much better this is and understand the difference, because it's just night and day. I'm going to play the front nine, I think. This hole is fun. This is probably my favourite on here. And Pinehurst is not... It's one of my favourite US Open venues. I think it's just a little bit different to the standard hack out of heavy rough every other hole. But I don't know the course all that well. So it's fun to kind of get to know it. Come on, we can go for a third chip in, right? Sure thing. Oh, it just turned. Yeah, don't really have that much to say. Like, there's certainly no nitpicks. I think these sorts of camera angles are great. It would be nice to have a few more of them throughout the course. I guess I have a few more critiques with this hole. So this is one that I noticed where it's a par 5 and it's playing at 494. Now, probably true, but if we're playing this course in game, I'd probably want this to be a par 4 and mimic that US Open feel. Like, people are expecting Pinehurst to be difficult. I think the second one is, and I'm guessing this is running out of meter, but the planting here, pretty good, but under the trees gets much, much sparser really pretty quickly. It does exist, and like, yeah, but you probably want a little bit more depth on it. So it'd be interesting to know how far we've got left in on this one. We're going to go into that. Okay, so 338, but into a par 5, you've got 160. It's not a lot. Like, this feels like it should be a par 4. But in the grand scheme of things, not really a big issue at all. Here's another one which I feel is kind of probably an us issue, maybe a LiDAR data issue, but you've got... I think it's possibly just the beads showing us stuff that we wouldn't realise in real life, but this putt is technically breaking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways if you look at the beads, and that feels like something that probably doesn't happen in real life, but it's only because we're obsessing over these little beads. in reality you're not really feeling all of these, but could also be a need to smooth out the LiDAR data a touch more on the greens. It's hard to know without really getting into the data and I guess walking the course as well. But particularly when those happen near a pin. Oh, whoops. It's nice to miss a 3-footer though. But when those happen near a pin, I mean, this shot looks gorgeous. Just, yeah, so much better than anything they've done. And this is a good hole to finish on then. Here's one where I think could probably still use a little bit more work with sightlines. So if you look at the view we've got here, and if we tap in L2, you can just see all of the stuff we should be able to see. So like this stuff down here, whereas we can't quite see that. Again, that's the perspective thing, but it'd be really cool to be able to see that a little bit more. And this green is absolutely brutal, particularly from this distance. So coming off that really short par 5 onto this feels like a big change in difficulty. I think that's just why it's just that par issue. There's a shot. So yeah, that's kind of all I've got. I mean, the course is really, really good. And if you haven't played it yet, do give it a round. Give it more than one round because it's so worth it. Hope you enjoyed. See you again soon.